The Illinois House beat the state Senate in the Chamber's annual softball game. It was not the only game being played in the state house this week. That's coming up next on Capitol View. I'm Amanda Vinicky, and I am joined this week by Mike Lawrence. He is an all-around Illinois political expert. So glad for you to join us.
Good to be here, Amanda.
Thanks, Mike. And welcome back. He's just back from Florida. So can you invite him to tan? Arizona, pardon me. Down south.
No problem. They're both
It shows how smart you are by escaping the winter. Somebody like me who wintered here in Springfield, Bruce Rushton of the Illinois Times.
Nice job.
And so, we're into May. Session is supposed to end May 31st. There's a whole lot of work ahead, but this week it seemed more like games were being played than actual work getting done. That's twofold. First of all, we had the Illinois House meeting in what's known as a committee of the whole. Basically, instead of going to separate hearings, the entire chamber gathers and heard testimony from witnesses about workers' compensation. And then we also had a series of votes on the budget. We'll get to that next. Let's focus on workers' compensation. This is Governor Bruce Rauner, part of his turnaround agenda. He says it's a really big reason that businesses flee Illinois because it's just so much more expensive here. 7th most expensive in the United States. He wants to bring that number down to average. What about this hearing? Did you feel like it was as uneven as Republicans say it was, and who gave testimony and what it was about?
Well, as we all know, the governor's been going after the unions big time, and predictably, they've reacted. So I think there was pressure, particularly on the Democrats in the House and the Senate, to show that they're really with the unions. Now, I think there was, and possibly still is, a possibility of getting some significant action on workers' comp reform, but by raising right to work and other issues the way he has, I think Governor Rauner has taken a risky path if he really wants to get to workers' comp, because it really has the union's backup, and certainly has that will impact how willing Democrat legislators will be to support more workers' comp reform.
Basically, by bringing all of these injured workers with really some heartbreaking stories about what had happened to them on the job, losing a leg, never being able to go back to work again, Democrats were showing their allegiances literally to the labor movement. Does Rauner putting forth, as you noted, the right to work and all of these other kind of anti-union stances maybe help him in any way in getting an agreement on workers' compensation? Okay, Democrats can say, we're not going to touch right to work, but we had to compromise somewhere and make it easier for them to come to an agreement on workers' compensation, or does it just hurt because everybody's got their knives out?
Well, I mean, my sense of this is that this hearing, this committee of the whole on workers' compensation, should have been actually called "It's the Budget Stupid" hearing. I mean, it was clear that workers' compensation isn't going to go anywhere anytime soon in a democratically controlled legislature. They did reforms 3 years ago. Have those reforms taken hold to the degree that Rauner and others might want them to have taken hold? Probably not. What's the reason for that? It could be perhaps that insurance companies aren't returning some of the gains that were made immediately as a result of the reform. I mean, there's that argument to be made. But there are so much bigger fish to fry right now than workmen's compensation. Not that that isn't an important issue, as folks made clear in this hearing. But it was a stacked hearing, and it was Madigan saying, look, this is something that isn't going to go anywhere this year. Drop it. Let's move on to something that we do have to accomplish.
You agree? Nothing's going to happen this year?
I'm not sure it's off the table. And it is, in a way, I think, or could be tied to the budget. If they're going to do anything meaningful on the budget, and let's hope they do, we got this gargantuan deficit. there are going to have to be Republican votes for more revenues. And I could see a scenario where that could be tied to workers' comp reforms. It certainly wouldn't be the first time that non-budgetary issues have been tied to the budget in the final resolution of a session.
Give me an example of that. Let's hold on there, because a lot has been made about Bruce Rauner saying that crisis creates opportunity, and his using his agenda as a bargain for the budget. It would be a big deal for a newly elected Republican governor who campaigned against his predecessor's income tax increase to be open to bringing in more revenue through some sort of tax hike. That'd be big. It'd be big, of course, for Democrats to go further on workers' compensation or many of the other items on Rauner's agenda. So in what other cases back in Illinois history have we seen the budget tied to change or to move other issues forward?
Well, property tax caps, for example, in 1991, it made it easier to get Republicans on board for keeping the income tax, the temporary income tax permanent at that time. Again, maybe those votes would have been there, but the fact is that when you got down to the end of the session in 91, and by the way, that went to the middle of July, it was a tough session. But when you got down to the end, there were several of those issues swirling around, and it's just not that unusual to have side issues out there that get tied together at the end. So I wouldn't rule it out, but my point earlier was by going after right to work, that got the non-public unions engaged in this. I'm not sure. I mean, AFSCME would have been out there, the teachers' unions would have been out there, but I think by adopting the strategy that he did, he got the trades involved, the laborers.
A whole lot more enemies, basically, because you saw Governor Pat Quinn had also angered AFSCME and the teachers' unions with his pension changes, but because he'd passed a capital program, he was aligned pretty darn well with the private sector and kind of the construction folks. They didn't mind him. They gave him money to run re-election. So you saw a union divide, but now all labor is united against Bruce Rauner.
And if you listen closely to what many of the business interests are saying, they're a lot more interested in workers' comp than they are in fighting this right to work thing, which, as Bruce indicated, they're going to lose anyway.
Yeah, and it seems as if this is a battle that Rauner himself really wants. The Chamber of Commerce had said, that's not our top priority. And frankly, during the campaign, Rauner had said right to work wasn't his top priority. And lo and behold, it became such. So anyway, workers' compensation, regardless, this committee of the whole, big deal, hasn't been held since 2008, and yet also not a big deal because that was not really an area, it seemed, where they were taking testimony to learn what to do to come to any sort of agreement or negotiation. It was more of a show.
It was sending a message, It was dogs talking to ponies, and
ponies talking back to dogs.
Right, and the common person doesn't understand either doggies or ponies, and so and that's often the problem with the legislature. You don't really understand what's going on because there's probably only 3 people, 4 people, less than 10 people that really understand what's going on, and the rest of us just kind of have to wait till the end of it. So this is just kind of part of, I think, the larger. For lack of a better word, bad kabuki theater that is every legislative session, and it's even more so this year because you've got this unknown here in the theater, that being Bruce Rauner, who is he ever a villain? He's doing all this kind of stuff, and so they're trying to kind of feel each other out here, and I think that with the committee of the whole thing, the Madigan's going to do the right to work here later. I think that they're making some progress and at least sizing each other up, and who's going to win? see.
Well, so we had another example of that this week, this Kabuki Theater, it seems, with the Illinois House voting down Rauner's human services budget. House Speaker Michael Madigan was the one that sponsored the measure, and it got 0 yes votes. All Republicans voted present, all Democrats voted against it, of course, because these are some really drastic cuts. Republicans blaming their present votes on procedure being flawed. They said there wasn't enough transparency. Au contraire, according to the speaker, he says that he was bringing this out because it's got to get out in the open. We've heard enough about these cuts. We've had committees hearing testimony for weeks, for hours on end. It's time to see where everybody stands. Draw that line in the sand. That line drawn. Governor Bruce Rauner, Democrats who control the General Assembly are not going to go along with your drastic cuts. To me, though, that's got to be a message that Rauner already knew, right?
Yeah.
What is the point of that?
Well, he already knew, and the thing
Everybody
is,
knows.
Well, the point is that you got to cut somewhere. I mean, and these might be viewed as drastic cuts, and they are drastic cuts. But there isn't anything that they've put forward so far that folks say, yeah, we can probably live without. Well, I take that back. What was it? The car theft, the auto car task force. I mean, like cops aren't already supposed to
dipped
come
into some funds.
Whoa, well, guess what? Car theft is still against the law, and I presume that cops are still, going to combat that. But let's take, for example, was somebody's sacred cow, which is the tobacco quit line. Well, we can't possibly cut that because smoking is bad, and of course everybody knows that smoking is bad. But darn it, it costs money. I mean, not a great deal of money in the scheme of things, but the anti-tobacco lobby is a very entrenched lobby. I mean, the Lung Association, those folks are nothing to be trifled with. Try to write a story about, anti-smoking ordinances, and you'll learn that very quickly. But the thing is that if you take something like that, okay, or pick and choose, should we do the anti-tobacco, should we do the tobacco quit line versus autistic kids? Because that's really, the sorts of decisions, value judgments we have to make. I think, frankly, most folks will go with the autistic kids. But nobody is really being real at this point in time and making these hard decisions. It's all a show. It's more Kabuki theater. And
so I'm wondering if part of why that was done was just to let off steam, to allow members who are really upset about this, because whereas there have to be those perhaps choices made, and maybe they will be made, there's clearly been a hesitancy to do so. Democrats are just so patently offended in many cases by the suggestion the governor is making by how much corruption and waste there is in government, and then these programs just being thrown out. So is this just to appease members? Was it to send a signal to Governor Rauner? What was it, Mike?
Well, the cuts go right at the Democratic base for the most part. Human services.
Right
but
there.
The fact of the matter is,
as they'll point out, they're not cutting any sort of tax breaks that are given to businesses.
Yeah.
Those all remained.
right, they're in, but if you're really going to get at a $6 billion deficit, you got to do both cuts and revenue, realistically. Now, if you're going to, even if you have new revenue, it would seem to me they're going to have to do some spending restraints at a minimum to keep us from getting right back in the problem. In fact, typically, not always, but typically when revenues are raised, taxes are raised, spending is also increased. Here, to get at this problem, you've got to put curbs on spending, and you've got to do the revenues. Now, the public continues to believe that you can do this by cuts. I think perhaps they're a little less firm on that, but poll after poll shows the public favors cutting our way out of this
Is
deficit.
that partially because of politicians who
Yeah,
constantly talk
they-
about waste,
No.
fraud, abuse? I mean, come on.
Yeah,
They're stabbing themselves in the foot, right?
Well, politicians always tell the truth.
But the fact of the matter
goodness
is,
for us, huh?
fact of the matter is, 95% of the budget is in the human services, education, public safety, all these things that the public does not want to have cut. So I think part of what happened was to drive home the fact that if you're going to have to cut, or you're going to avoid the kind of cuts that the governor has called for, you've got to do revenues. And I think the governor ultimately may go along with doing revenues, but
he's been open to it. He just won't really say it flat out until he
and
gets an agreement.
We don't know now how this is going to turn out. You've got a rookie governor, and the legislature controlled by the other party. I was optimistic that because a Republican governor and a Democrat-controlled legislature were going to have to share responsibility as well as power, that there could be an agreement. I'm a little less optimistic now about that, but I still think it could happen. We may be here. We may be here a long time.
Oh, well, I think it still could happen. I mean, it's about the worst kept secret in town that, Rauner is meeting with folks to talk about perhaps revenue enhancements. I mean, there are these meetings that are going on behind closed doors. Everybody knows it. We're not supposed to know it, but it's happening. And so, it could still happen. It's just,
it's weird to me that it's not supposed to be known, because don't you want it to be known? I mean, most people, whereas there is, if you're a Democrat, you like Democrats, a Republican, you like Republicans, the word compromise isn't generally evil in the public at large. So what do you want to be? Hey, I'm meeting with people.
Look, it's not rocket
not when
science.
it's taxes.
Look, it's not rocket science. I mean, it's a matter of math and a matter of politics. And you've got a divided government. The governor, the General Assembly is controlled by Democrats. You've got a Republican governor. It has to happen. I mean, and so I think it will happen. I mean, it's looking bad right now, but we're still early on. We'll know more around Labor Day.
What about, though, right to work? We'll know by the time CapitolView is next on how this all pans out. But House Speaker Michael Madigan has called for a vote on this local right to work zones, empowerment zones is what Governor Bruce Rauner has called them. Madigan says in this press release here, financial security of middle-class families and others struggling to make ends meet will be affected by this proposal. We owe it to them to make sure the governor's idea gets a full hearing. Of course, we haven't seen a bill from the governors yet. So, what's Madigan up to here?
I predict a unanimous approval of right to work in the
House.
I mean, this.
As Madigan points out, it seems like he's saying, hey, enough talking here. It's been 100 days since you talked about right to work at a hearing in Decatur.
I think that is what he's saying. I think that he's saying, the same thing to an extent with this thing on the human services cut. It's like, it's time to quit talking this nonsense that's not achievable right now. Right to work is not achievable in the state government. That's not going to happen. Now, you can go around to Podunksville and get these resolutions passed if you'd like, but it's not going to happen on a state level, so let's dispense with that. Let's move on. That's what this is.
The governor did, as you noted, he's been trying to get municipalities on board. The city of Chicago, of course, Illinois' largest city, and Rauner has been buds for a long time with its mayor, Rahm Emanuel, fresh off of re-election himself. Bruce Rauner making an unprecedented speech to the Chicago City Council, albeit a lame duck one. He said, for Chicago to get what it wants, Illinois must get what it needs. Chicago, of course, wants a lot. It wants a casino. It wants pension relief. So what was the point of this? As Rauner said, for Daniel to go into the lion's den of the Chicago City Council. Bruce?
Yeah, I don't know what the point of that was. I mean, he goes into the most stringently. I mean, what was the vote in Chicago in terms of the governor's race? Yeah, I mean,
but why bother? Because it went Democratic.
And he said, Chicago public schools. I'm not going to bail them out. They go bankrupt. That's not. And he's been pretty clear.
He's raised that specter.
He's raised that specter. And so I don't know what the point is. Maybe that's something to just more of this. I'm the governor sort of thing. But I don't see where he's making any inroads there. I mean, he and Rahm Emanuel are supposed to have have, a good relationship. He and James Meeks are supposed to have a good relationship, but it's not playing out in terms of anything that's been productive or moving anything forward.
Even as he was there, the Chicago City Council rejected the turnaround agenda. So no surprise. But is this maybe a longer form strategy of, hey, everybody, look what I did, look how hard I tried to the Republican base, or trying to make friends on the Chicago City Council? Is that it, Mike?
Well, I think Madigan, with his hearings that he's holding
Right.
on workers' comp, the budget, is speaking at, part of this is speaking to the Democrat base. I think what Rauner did was speaking to the Republican base. I mean, he wasn't just talking to the Chicago City Council, that's for sure. So, he's worked to burnish this image as a fighter and, somebody, and a reformer.
Negotiator.
Yeah.
Negotiator.
But the fact of the matter is, we've seen governors, including the late Dan Walker, who passed away, go too far along that line, and they got themselves, by confrontation, they got themselves in positions where they
couldn't get out of.
They were less than effective.
Let's move on to something that I know, Bruce, you very much want to talk about. We've talked a lot about Illinois' cuts. There are plenty of opportunities for revenue. One of these opportunities was supposed to be by allowing medical marijuana into the state. How is that working out? We've had, I believe, let's see, I've got the numbers written down here. More than 20,000 people, nearly 21,000 people have looked at the website, evidently are interested in the program in some way, shape, or form. Of that, however, 3,000 have applied.
Well, your figures are a little different than mine, but I won't.
Or, I mean, have gotten, yeah.
Well, I had 2,300, 3,000. It's a matter. I mean, you sit down and you do the math on this. Okay, the first thing to keep in mind is this program sunsets at the end of 2017, and we haven't gotten the first crop yet. The first marijuana that could actually be sold isn't going to be available probably until the fall or near the end of this year. And so that's when the sales start. Each person who has a card can buy up to 5 ounces of marijuana in a month, which is an awful lot of weed. I mean, this is like Cheech and Chong with 3 vans that are smoking going down the highway. And so let's assume that 2,300 folks buy the maximum amount at $280 an ounce, which is what the figure is, based on others' experiences. It works out for each of these cultivation centers $2.14 million per year, and that's eliminating the middleman. So dispensaries are completely out of the equation. Each one of these cultivation centers is costing on the order of $10 million to build. And they're also having to pay $200,000 for a state license. Plus they have to show they have $2 million in a surety bond. The math just absolutely doesn't work out. If you double the figure, and let's say 5,000 people, the math still doesn't work out. And so there is no way that, given what's going on right now, that anybody can make money selling marijuana in the state of Illinois. And it's kind of analogous. I keep going back to in the state fair. The state used to sell beer at the state fair, and they proved they couldn't make money. They lost money selling beer at the state fair in the late 1970s, and which is why it was turned over to the private sector. So what we've got now, and plus now you've got this dual thing coming up with decriminalization of marijuana. The reason why people aren't getting cards is that it's a major hassle. You have to get a doctor's written permission. It can't just be a pot doc like it is in some of these other states. You have to have a long-standing relationship with that physician. The physician has to say, okay, you can have marijuana, and it's a very limited number of conditions. I think there's only 20.
They expanded it this week.
They expanded, yes.
Now,
Now they expand.
Diabetes.
No diabetes, but
no
anorexia nervosa, you can do that.
I didn't know that was...
You can now smoke, assuming the state health director, this is just recommendations, it would be allowed for superior canal dehiscence syndrome. You could be allowed for Beckett's autoimmune disease, migraines, irritable bowel syndrome. I mean, but not for diabetes, not for anxiety, not for chronic pain.
Anxiety would be the big one.
Yeah, anxiety. Well, of course, if I was one of these marijuana businessmen, I'd be anxious. But the thing about it is that the way that it's currently structured, it doesn't seem like it can ever possibly succeed. Lou Lang has got a bill up to extend this for another 4 years, which to me just seems like you're kicking the can down the road, given
But there's no appetite to scale back. I mean, on one hand, as you noted, the General Assembly has been advancing a measure that would effectively decriminalize medical marijuana, or not medical marijuana, pardon me, pot, period.
Period, right.
But you'd basically get a citation, just like if you were
maximum
caught speeding.
fine, yeah. Instead of paying, it's a $125 maximum fine. So now compare that to every year you have to pay $100 to get a card. You have to get fingerprinted. You got to get a background check. You got the expense of going to a physician. You know, they say, "Hey, doc, would you put in writing that I could smoke weed?" I mean, you know, or are you going to take your chances?
Is this going to change before all these businesses go out of business, even as they're trying to get their feet off the ground?
Well, the governor has said he's not really in favor of extending this, and again, that this may just be playing poker. You know, there's a school of thought out here that this decriminalization measure is some way to perhaps put pressure on the governor to extend this medical marijuana program. But if you put Illinois' medical marijuana program up against what other states have done, it just seems like it's something that was, you know,
all the bragging about being so strong may be, again, going too far out, pulling a Dan Walker.
Yeah, well, you're trying.
Stuck in the corner.
What you're doing is that you're compromising to the point where you don't have anything that's workable, and that I think is what we've got right now. It's compromised to the point where it's not workable in the real world. Other states are catching up to us.
You've touched on something that is a key phrase, perhaps, of this legislative session beyond just pot. That might be the new way to characterize the turnaround agenda in the state's budget. I like that, Bruce. We are nearly coming to an end. Briefly, we did have a big weekend in the state capitol with the funeral procession that was kind of recreating when Abraham Lincoln was buried 150 years ago. Either of you attend that? How'd it go? No, I went. It was really, it was moving, I have to say. In certain times, more so Sunday, the crowd just hushed as the hearse went by. And in other legislative news, we have a new state fair director finally, and he got started on Wednesday. Says he wants to make the fair more agricultural and also get some business sponsorships to come in. We'll be following that and so much more. Once again, this has been Mike Lawrence, Bruce Rushton. I'm Amanda Vinicky with Illinois Public Radio and WUIS. See you next time on Capitol View.